Good morning. This is Kirk Williamson for INR-690 for the oral presentation of the dissertation defense, or the practice therein. I'll be discussing this morning my dissertation proposal and walking through a little bit of the chapters that I've developed so far through my table of contents and a attempt at trying to defend what my working copy is based on. So the current title of my paper is The Great Power Competition in Space, How a Multipolar System of International Relations Will Affect Astropolitics. Throughout this process, at least over this class, I've kind of taken a broader approach and tried to refine that into subsections of astropolitics, specifically in how geopolitics is either similar or different than astropolitics. Astropolitics being the politics of space. Through research, I've already noted 3 areas in which geopolitics is the same as astropolitics. There's a few case studies that I'll be exploring in my paper as evidence that geopolitics or astropolitics is nothing more than a continuation of geopolitics in international relations. The first example that I have found was recently while I was in Kazakhstan. There's a launch facility in Kazakhstan, one of the few in the world that can actually launch humans into space. And the Soviet Union used to use that facility in Kazakhstan. Russia to this day still uses it and leases it from Kazakhstan for about $150 million a year. Recently, though, the Kazakhstan government, after holding multiple democratic elections, have kicked the Russians out of that facility. Now, not because of the elections necessarily, but because they are now calling in a lot of the debt that Russia owes the Kazakhstan government, either through non-payments of their lease agreement or because of environmental cleanup that Russia has not done, as lifting humans into space can be quite a environmentally unfriendly business. So this has set Russia back in the pursuit of space. They're building another facility, but it's an example, a very small one, but a very real example of how geopolitics is affecting astropolitics and not vice versa. That was one example. Another example is how does it move from there? Russia, being a nation that has been sanctioned for their invasion of Ukraine, are finding a difficult time of obtaining the microprocessors and chips and all the gizmos and gadgets required to launch humans into space. Right now, it appears, and again, there needs to be more detail, and I'll get into this in my paper, but it seems as though that Russia is becoming a junior partner to China in the great power competition, and in doing so may have to rely on China for a lot of its launches, whether that be humans, because of China's facility in Western China. Russia may have to ride on Chinese-built rockets, either for launching humans or even possibly for cargo into space. And that is another example of how geopolitics is affecting astropolitics. China being a great power, and Russia still a great power, but being a junior power to their Eastern Alliance neighbor in that world. The paper will also look at things of how the rules-based system of space potentially breaks down because of geopolitics. A couple of examples that I found, the most notable being the 1967 Space Accord, and how over time that has become less and less relevant as technology has increased, as the 1967 Space Treaty never thought about the commercialization of space, or that the only 2 signatories to the 1967 Space Treaty were one of those countries doesn't exist anymore. At the time of its signing, only two of those countries were ever in space: the Soviet Union and the United States. And as I said, one of those doesn't even exist anymore in the Soviet Union. So, the astropolitics in that example breaks down over time. There was another in 1974, an agreement that was kind of an update to the '67 Space Treaty that recognizes commercialization of space. Wasn't signed by hardly any of the major powers for various reasons that I'll get into. So that was a failed treaty. Currently, I think the most recent example we're seeing in astropolitics, or geopolitics affecting astropolitics, as it were, is in the Artemis Accords. That's an accord by the United States. It's a bilateral agreement between the United States and England or Israel or Japan that basically says that you'll recognize the United States' commercial interests on the moon if or you'll recognize the United States' commercial interest on the moon in order to receive U.S. Backing on the lunar surface, whether that includes the build-out of a 3G cell service, so Israel can use the United States' cellular service on the moon. That enables things like GPS, which is vitally important for autonomous vehicles on the moon. It also, battery backup systems. There's talk of a nuclear reactor. I use that term very loosely. Not a physicist, but basically a battery backup system on the moon. So if Japan or England or whoever, Great Britain, whoever wants to use that battery, if it were, you would have to sign the Artemis Accords. So the Artemis Accords basically rebuking the multilateral agreements that have been well established in geopolitics for a bilateral agreement to affect astropolitics. This paper will also go into research into how astropolitics is separate than geopolitics. Other examples of how geopolitics is different than astropolitics, the militarization of space. Nothing more than the great power competition occurring in space. So there's a lot of research and a lot of case studies and examples in geopolitics of how geopolitics is pushing astropolitics and not vice versa. Subject to change, and that's something this paper will explore. The foundation of the paper and the understanding of it, and it's not going to cover every single nation. That's just too impossible. It's not going to cover, for example, the United Arab Emirates' space program. It may ancillarily do that, but not specifically. And it's because it's just impossible, like I said, to cover every space program in the world. However, what it will do is attempt to look at the great power countries and to include the United States, Europe, Russia, China, and India, and how they are going to compete in that space environment, and how geopolitics will affect astropolitics, or vice versa, in order to give a better understanding of the future of astropolitics. It is a newly developing field. I mean, it can really has its roots truly in the 1967 Space Treaty, but more recently, you're starting to see a lot of changes in that field to include, and I think this will be a very important piece of astropolitics, which is the privatization of space. We are starting to see non-state actors, similar to what we see in geopolitics, starting to affect astropolitics. I think Elon Musk's SpaceX, Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin, or Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic, all great examples of how the non-state actors are getting involved in space, and how is that going to affect the great powers. All of this is a big umbrella, but specifically, I think by fine-tuning this dissertation, I think I can really pull out a few case studies to use as evidence to either find out that geopolitics is affecting astropolitics, or vice versa. Still very much in development. There's been a slight revision in my paper in the past week and a half since we submitted the dissertation proposals for class. So still ongoing, but making good progress so far. Been very excited about the writing process. Still very nervous about the writing process. I could get all of this completely wrong, and but it's something that I'm looking forward to, and I truly believe in my heart, and I'm motivated by it because I think it's the future. I think it is a natural progression of powers on Earth to pursue the benefits of space. Those benefits include obviously military primacy, commercial interests, to include the lunar economy, to include everything from where satellites are being able to be located, and on the very far reaches of the spectrum. And nothing this paper will address specifically, but what if ET phones home, and who talks to them? Is it China? Is it the United States? Is it Japan? I mean, who really does? And those are examples, I think, in a very theoretical world of how astropolitics could affect geopolitics, and something that can be explored as an example, but highly theoretical, nothing realistic at the moment. But there are opportunities out there, I think, for astropolitics to become a subject matter in its own self into the future. Today, as this paper will explore, maybe it is, maybe it's not already. But that requires a lot more writing and a lot more research than what I currently just have available at my fingertips to be able to adequately record this video. But it's something that I'm working on and working through, and appreciate your time and have absolutely loved this class. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the rest of this class. Thank you.